Piltdown Man, discovered or presented as proof back in 1912. The New York Times newspaper declared Darwin theory proved true, in an article they get through and say that it is proved true. Piltdown Man was used in the famous Goats monkey trial back in 1925 as proof for human evolution. That trial was a very famous trial that really put Christianity on trial against evolution, and they proclaimed evolution as true at that particular point in different ways. What was Piltdown Man? Well, it was an ape-like jawbone, lower part of the jaw, and some sort of human skull cap. And these parts were discovered back in over in Piltdown, England, in 1908 and 1912, thus the name Piltdown Man. And these fragments were used as proof for evolution for 40 years. Now keep that in mind. Presented in textbooks and science journals and museums and etc. as proof for evolution for over 40 years. Claimed to be a 500,000 to 1 million year old intermediate link from apes to humans. What was Piltdown Man in reality? A deliberate fraud, discovered so in 1953 after 40 years of indoctrination from a secular perspective. What were those pieces in reality? Well, we know the teeth in the jawbone were that of an orangutan that had been dead for roughly 50 years, clearly ape. The teeth had been filed down to look more humanoid, so like a transition from ape to human. So they're somewhere in between. They've been filed down to look like that. And then the skull cap and the jaw were stained the same color to look like they were old and they were related. They carbon dated the human skull to be roughly 500, 700 years old, even within their own secular assumptions. And really, Piltdown Man is one of the greatest hoaxes of all time in secular science. And discovered after 40 years of indoctrination, but not before teaching multiple generations that evolution must be true. And guys, think about it. If evolution is true, the Bible's clear history is false. And if the Bible's clear history is false, why trust it about morality or salvation? For multiple generations, this was undermining biblical authority, as it's still doing today in different ways, and these different so-called ape men. Another example. What about Nebraska Man? Discovered back in 1922, supposedly good evidence for human evolution, claimed to be a 1 million year old intermediate link, also used in the Scopes monkey trial back in 1925. So what evidence did they have to create Nebraska Man and to make that drawing you see there before you? Well, first let me tell you what they did not have. They did not have a skeleton, a skull, or even a jawbone. So what did they have to make this very elaborate, detailed drawing of Nebraska Man and his wife? Well, these were scientifically built from a tooth. Yes, that's right, a single tooth to create that drawing. Guys, even Sherlock Holmes would be impressed by that sort of deductive reasoning power, all right? That's really just kind of using your imagination in a large degree. And so they kept researching, kept digging in that particular area, found more bones connected to that tooth. It turns out that tooth did not belong to a man at all. That tooth belonged to a extinct variation of pig. There is the real Nebraska Man right there. And as my friend Dr. Terry Mortensen says, this is the first time in history that a pig made a monkey of a man. It truly is. Or Ramapithecus. Discovered back in the 1930s. They found a very ape-like jawbone, and from this, they got this. Some sort of hominid, kind of transitioning from ape to human, kind of walking semi-upright. This was supposedly proof for evolution from that one jawbone. As this secular scientist in Time magazine back in 1977, they said Ramapithecus is ideally structured to be an ancestor of hominids. If he isn't, we don't have anything else that is. And that's kind of telling on the motivation. What was Ramapithecus in reality? Well, it claimed to be a 14 million year old intermediate link, but in truth, it was very similar to a baboon discovered back in Ethiopia back in 1970, had a similar dental structure as that particular baboon and similar body structure as well. And then promptly it was dropped from the human line at that particular time. So, just real quick, a summary of the facts thus far. Piltdown Man was a deliberate hoax. Nebraska Man was a pig. Ramapithecus was just an ape. And in each case, the secular dates and the initial findings of all those remnants were wrong they were off by more than 500,000 years in each case, sometimes close to 1 million years. And that's a summary of the facts thus far. Give you a few other examples of the track record of the 8 men in history. You got Boxgrove Man. Very detailed picture of Boxgrove Man and a relative there in the background as well. What did they have to draw Boxgrove Man? They had one shin bone. One shin bone to draw that. Again, it shows the power of people's worldview on this issue. Or Ardipithecus ramidus cadaba. Say that 3 times really fast, all right? I dare you. But variations of the different Ardipithecus out there, but here's one of them. Presented as proof of evolution back in Time magazine. Here was the evidence for Ardipithecus ramidus cadaba. That whole mess of bones, very fragmented as they typically are. And they said from all those bones, all the bones are very ape-like besides one particular bone. One of the bones looked very human. Which bone was that? A single toe bone. That bone right there looked very human, but here's the thing about that bone. That bone, that toe bone, was found 11 miles away from the other pieces of the fossil that you're looking at in a different layer of dirt, found 11 miles away. Actually, all the bones you're looking at right now were spread over 9 miles. And so this has caused some to ask, was this the first suicide bomber, right? And was he wearing a nuclear bomb that spread those bones over 9 miles? And guys, if you look throughout history, 8 men have been deduced from things like alligator bones, horse bones, bear bones, elephant bones, donkey bones, even dolphin bones have been deduced to be 8 men and then proven to be wrong. Why? Well, for lots of reasons. Number one, the worldview issue is the biggest issue. And then also, lack of fossils to work with. We've got to realize that less than 1% of all fossils are vertebrate fossils. And only a fraction of that are land vertebrates. And guys, 95% of all land vertebrate fossils, they're 1 bone or less. 1 bone or less. So they're wide open to interpretation. As this secular scientist says, everybody knows fossils are fickle. Bones will sing any song you want to hear. And that is definitely true. Give you an example of this. Think about it like this. What if you found a piece of very ape-like jawbone? There it is right there. So a piece of ape jaw, and if you try to think to yourself as maybe a secular evolutionist, how do I interpret this piece of jawbone? It looks apish. Well, you could put that piece of jawbone, put it in a very rounded jawbone, and give it small incisors and small canine teeth. Don't put large gaps between those teeth. And what you have there is some sort of in-between jawbone between apes and humans. It must belong to a hominid, an ancestor, therefore it belongs to a human evolutionary line. And that gets a lot of attention and, of course, helps support your research and support your ideology more importantly. But what if you applied that same jawbone and put it just in a regular ape jawbone that's very U-shaped with large canines, large incisors, gaps between the canines and incisors? Well, if you have that, it's just nothing but a dead ape. Same little piece, 2 very different interpretations based on your starting assumptions, your worldview, and your motivations. A great example of this interpretational bias and how this plays such a big role is Lucy. You've probably heard of Lucy. We'll come back to Lucy in more detail here in a bit. But there are over 100 different depictions of Lucy from a secular perspective based on the interpretations of fragmentary evidence. You see these literally all over the world. We'll see some more later on. As this secular scientist says, few scientists produce such abundant returns from so few fragments as paleontology, the study of fossils. As this secular scientist says, again, secular scientists, the problem with a lot of anthropologists, those who study the human fossil record and study human history, is that they want so much to find a hominid, a human ancestor, that any scrap of bone becomes a hominid bone. Again, ultimately, this is a worldview issue. We build our thinking from our foundational worldview. We're motivated by our worldview. And again, if you start with the wrong assumptions, as the secularists do, you will get the wrong conclusions. Bottom line is this. They're really trusting man's best guess about history over God's clear, revealed eyewitness account about history. And again, wrong assumptions, wrong conclusions. Keep that thought in mind. And so, what is currently suggested as the best evidence for these 8 men, this human evolution presented from the secularists? And I put the word currently in quotation marks. Why? Because this is always changing. If I updated this talk for every new piece of supposed human evolution proof presented in different papers, this talk would be 5 to 10 hours long and keep getting longer. So I'll give you just kind of a basic framework of some of the generally currently things presented as proof for human evolution. And what I really want you to kind of focus in on, I want to really just expose the trends, expose the pattern that happens throughout history, how a piece of evidence is presented as proof for evolution, used for a while, and then typically later on found out not to be related to humans at all, and then swept underneath the rug. And so I want you really to see the pattern. I want us to learn how to think critically and biblically as we look at these different evidences. And as new evidences are presented in the future, we can still think critically and biblically, remember these core principles. So here's the general flow of what's generally currently presented as proof for human evolution. You will see in the textbooks, in the zoos and museums, if you go to natural history museums around the world, or read the textbooks or watch National Geographic, you have something basically like this. They'll be suggested there's a hominidae, which is the ancestor of all primates living today, according to secular thinking. Maybe lived roughly 30 to 40 to 50 million years ago. Estimates vary depending on who you're asking. And it's all basically guesswork right now from even the secular perspective. And then after the hominidae, they will suggest maybe there's some variation of the Ramapithecus, roughly around 14 million years ago with Ramapithecus. And then you got the Australopithecines on the scene roughly 2 to 3 to 4 million years ago, depending on who you ask. And these numbers change a lot throughout history and currently as well, but that's the general trend. And those are really just distinct apes. If once you actually look at the actual data, we'll see that as we go through. And then from there, you jump to what are clearly humans. You get to the Homo erectus, which is humans, post-flood humans most likely. Then you get different variations of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, modern man, Java man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll kind of go through each one of these, show the general trend and how the evidence is presented, manipulated, and then discarded over time. And I want you to really grab hold of that trend and think about it biblically, critically. Also, by the way, did you know, before we kind of go any further, today, modern humans are typically called Homo sapien sapien. That's right, Homo sapien sapien. Why? Well, I'll give you a hint. Look at what the word sapien means. We'll come back to it at the end of the talk because I think it's a key in understanding what's going on today and why it's happening today. But we're called Homo sapien sapien. We'll come back to that at the end. But what about the hominidae? What is the supposed evidence for this ancestor of all primates living today? Well, for a long time, the secularists thought that Eosimius was the ancestor of all primates living today. What was Eosimius? Well, it's a lemur-like monkey suggested to live roughly 30 to 40 million years ago. How did they know anything about Eosimius at all? Well, they found these two bones right here. Two jaw bones the size of grains of rice. That's it for Eosimius. And from those two jaw bones, they concluded that Eosimius was shy, nocturnal, had large saucer-like eyes, and flitted about the treetops. Again, even Sherlock Holmes would be impressed by that sort of deduction, or depressed, right? And this little critter right here seems shocked that we reached that conclusion. This guy's still around today, probably what they're looking at more or less in those bone fragments. Not an ancestor to all primates living today, just a variation of a tree-like, lemur-like monkey. So Eosimius was kind of swept under the rug more or less. And that's why back in 2009, Ida got such fanfare. Some of you might remember this. Ida was presented as proof of evolution, the missing link that we've been looking for all this time. When Ida was unveiled to the public back in 2009, Ida got a website. She got a book, a documentary series on the History Channel, all released at the same time to really push this teaching that Ida is the ancestor of us all. She was called, upon her unveiling to the public, the eighth wonder of the world, the holy grail of evolution, the Rosetta Stone, unveiling all these mysteries to us. And because they thought they'd found the missing link, even many evolutionists were willing to admit, evolution is finally confirmed. Finally. Hasn't been confirmed as of yet, but now this fossil, it confirms it. And by the way, you see this language all the time. It's repeated again and again and again. And even this secularist says there's no longer a missing link. What's implied there? There was a missing link, but now we got it, so now we can feel free to declare there's not a missing link anymore. Ida was actually put on the Google logo when she was unveiled to the public. And guys, that is big time. When you're put on the Google logo, you've hit big time. So in 2009, she's called the eighth wonder of the world. 2010, Ida is declared a dead monkey. What happened? Well, they kept looking at the bones, and the more they looked at the bones, the more experts looked at the bones, they realized this is nothing but a monkey-like creature, a lemur-like creature. Nothing to do with being an ancestor to the primates living today, including us. What do we learn from Ida? Well, Ida is a lemur-like creature. Ida is a great fossil. She's very well preserved, that's all the hallmarks of a rapid burial like during a flood, maybe even a global flood, as described in God's Word. And then also we learned that the evolutionists, they open up about what they're missing when they think they found what they're missing. You see that a lot. And then what happens is this, that Ida, after she was revealed to be nothing but a dead primate of some sort, some dead lemur-like monkey, she swept underneath the rug with significantly less fanfare than what she was initially unveiled with. So they give her all this publicity about how she is the missing link, and then when she is found not to be the missing link, they quietly sweep her under the rug, but still leaving the impression that this proves evolution to be true. And guys, this is the pattern. It truly is. You see again and again and again, unveiled to large fanfare and then swept underneath the rug, but still leaving the impression evolution must be true. And this is a great example of upscaling an ape fossil, as we talked about earlier. Nothing but an ape upscaled to be humanoid, a hominid. So that leads us to Ramapithecus. What was the initial finding for Ramapithecus? Well, this is what they had right here. From those pieces of jawbone for Ramapithecus, they went from that to that. There's Ramapithecus right there. That's a pretty big jump, right? Notice the whites around the eyes, that's distinctly human, and the eyes aren't preserved in the fossil record. That's artist reconstruction. And as we found more and better bones of Ramapithecus, we know that their skulls looked like this, the one in the middle. Very much like an orangutan, and that's all it was. Some sort of dead variation of orangutan or something along those lines. And evidently, these guys think it's hilarious that we think we're related to them or their ancestors. So, track record on this thus far for Homininidae, no common ancestor. And for Ramapithecus, just an extinct or dead orangutan. And by the way, notice, please, there's supposedly millions of years of human evolutionary history with absolutely no tangible evidence for any of that evolution, just assumed to be true in evolutionary ideology, but presented as fact in textbooks, zoos, museums. And then to replace Ramapithecus, you got Ardipithecus ramidus, which is Ardi, presented years ago as proof for evolution, supposedly a 4 million year old missing link. And I love what we read about as she was unveiled to a lot of fanfare to the public as proof for evolution. What's the evidence for the pictures you're looking at right now for what they called Ardi? Well, here's the evidence. That mishmash of fragmented bones, it took them 15 years to sort out all those bones. And I love this quote. Follow along with me on the quote. On discovery of Ardi, she was found in very bad condition. These badly broken elements, such as the untrained eye, so if you're not trained in evolutionary ideology, you can't really understand these things, such as the untrained eye sees here, were interpreted by professional paleontologists, put in evolutionary paleontologists with a worldview. And with the aid of specialized computer software, which that software is made by a person with a worldview, with assumptions, and to a scientific opinion, secular ideology about Ardi's skeleton, her bodily form, what she looked like, how she walked around, et cetera, et cetera. And so doing all that based on their ideology, based on their worldview, they went from this to that to that. Fragmented evidence interpreted within a worldview to get their conclusions. They had a whole Discovery Channel special released with the unveiling of Ardi to the public, and they showed how they put her together. They took all the fragments, interpreted them with a secular evolutionary worldview to put it together the way they think she went together based on evolutionary thinking. And so they went from that, and then they completed the skeleton, made her walk upright, although the bones implied ape-like locomotion, and then they put on all the flesh, the bones, they filled in the gaps there, put on the muscles and the hair, and then they did this. They took a human, put motion sensors on the human, had the human walk around and climb and trees, and then put the flesh of Ardi on the human with computer CGI to make Ardi kind of walk like a human but look like an ape. And this was shown to millions of people around the world through the Discovery Channel. And it's very convincing. It looks really good. The CGI is really well done. But it's all based on an interpretation based on a secular worldview, not on the actual fragments or bone fragments themselves. As this secular scientist says, by the way, already it's just some sort of extinct ape, probably orangutan or some variation of that, just an extinct ape. This secular scientist says fossil evidence of human evolutionary history is fragmentary. It really is, and open to various interpretations. So, thus far, common ancestor, we don't know who it is, even in secular thinking. Ramapithecus, just an extinct variation of orangutan, same thing with already some extinct or dead ape. Now, what about Australopithecines? The Australopithecines are maybe the most famous of the hominids, of the ape men. There are different variations of the Australopithecines. Here's one. And if you notice the artist's reconstruction about the Australopithecines here, notice how this one's looking into the future, gazing out into the distance, contemplating the meaning of life, obviously. Standing upright, like a human posture, given human hands and the use of tools. And the most famous Australopithecines is this one, called Lucy. You've probably heard of Lucy, right? And Lucy, Australopithecines afarensis, supposedly one of the best evidences of human evolution, or at least was taught that way for a very long time. Now, she's falling out of favor a bit, still presented as proof of evolution, but she was used for a very long time as the ultimate proof for evolution in human evolutionary thinking. So we're going to spend a little bit of time of just kind of debunking Lucy because of her special place in evolutionary history. So how did they find Lucy? Well, Donald Johanson went to Africa to find Lucy back in the 1970s. He went there with a grant to find a missing link. So notice his motivation. He went there to find something. He's looking for something in particular to confirm his starting assumption. And he found Lucy about 2 weeks before his grant money ran out, according to some sources. So it seems to make you wonder about the motivation there. But anyway, he found Lucy then, and her bones were discovered while they're listening to the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. And that's how she got the name Lucy. Now they found around 25% of her total fossil. That's it. And she was claimed to be roughly 3.5 million year old intermediate link and claimed to walk upright like a human. But again, this is fragmentary evidence that's wide open to interpretation. So if you put those bones in more of an ape-like framework, like they seem to fit very well, Lucy had long arms and short legs like apes today. But you could also squeeze those arm bones together to make them shorter, spread the leg bones out to make the legs longer, and to make her look more human, to make her a hominid and a human ancestor. And so same evidence, again, but two very different interpretations based on two very different worldviews. And guys, the secular interpretation dominates the landscape of these bones. And she's presented as proof for human evolution all around the world, even at the angst of many secular scientists who disagree with the modern presentations of her. But this is how she's typically presented, like here at the St. Louis Zoo. She's walking upright. Notice her frame is very human, has an ape-like face, but other than that, very human, kind of hairy, but very human. Human short arms, human long legs, human-like feet just like yours. Well, maybe yours aren't that hairy, but you get the idea. Same structure, human-like hands. And please bear in mind, they found no hand bones and no foot bones with the original Lucy fossil. None. But yet here's how her feet are displayed all the time, like at the St. Louis Zoo and many other places, or in the textbooks. Here's a drawing. Notice the feet are distinctly human in this drawing, based on a secular interpretation. Now, also realize we have found many bones belonging to the Australopithecines over the years. We found many foot bones and hand bones belonging to Lucy's relatives. And guys, they're distinctly ape-like. They had long, curved fingers and locking wrists. They had very ape-like feet. Toe goes out to the side, short ape-like legs, long ape-like arms, ape-like shoulders, ape-like skulls, ape-like everything. Yet she still presented very human in all the evidence we see in the zoos and museums, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Charles Oxenerd, an expert in this field and definitely not the creationist, said her toes, Lucy's toes, stick out like that of a chimp, like a thumb out to the side. That's the way her foot was shaped, like apes. Yet she's still depicted like this all the time around the world. And guys, this is not education. It is indoctrination. They think it fits the basic ideology, so even though it goes against the known facts, it still fulfills the impression they want to give and the worldview they want to teach. whether the St. Louis Zoo, the Chicago Field Museum, the London Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian, or in magazines, she's presented as very human-like with an ape-like face, going against, again, all the actual known evidence. And supposedly the best evidence that Lucy was transitioning to be a human and walk upright was her knee bone. Dr. Johansen argued that the angle of the femur going into the tibia was angled in such a way that it was kind of in between the angles of humans and apes. You see, for apes, their leg bones tend to be very vertical, just kind of straight up and down for the most part. Not a lot of angle there from the upper leg bone to the lower leg bone. Man, we have a distinct angle in that helps us do many cool things as humans in walking, jumping, skipping, dancing, etc. And then Lucy seemed to be kind of somewhere in between. And so he said, this proves she is transitioning. But guys, first of all, that knee that they found that was supposedly Lucy's is probably not her knee at all. It was found a year earlier, 70 meters lower in the dirt and over a mile away. So number one, it's probably not Lucy's knee. Number two, there are lots of monkey-like creatures today, apes today, that have different angles of the femur going into the tibia. So the angle doesn't prove it's transitioning. Orangutans and spider monkeys have angles in their femurs as well. We see that today. Doesn't prove anything about Lucy transitioning. Even more important than her knee, though, is Lucy's hips. Lucy's hips are angled in such a way to be very much like that of a chimp and not like a human. You see, the angle of human hips and apes' hips are very different because we move differently. As this secular scientist says, an expert in this field, again, a secular scientist, I'll kind of just paraphrase a quote, her hips look like that of a chimp, very similar to that of a chimp's hips. The hips don't lie for Lucy, all right? And they seem very closer in locomotion to how apes moved, not humans. So in other words, Lucy walked kind of like a chimp. So most likely she walked on all fours, like chimps today. She probably waddled on two legs and went back to all fours like chimps today. But guys, her original discoverers, they did not like that. And it did not fit their idea and their worldview about Lucy. So I want you to see what a team of scientists did. Only one is shown in the video to make the evidence of Lucy fit their preconceived ideas. And as you watch this, bear in mind, these are very smart people, but this clip shows really the power of your worldview, the power of your starting assumptions to dictate your conclusions. Check this out.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
After Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, perhaps by animals browsing at the lakeshore.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's.
Okay, so just one quick interruption. Notice the original ape-like perfect fit, it was an illusion. Why? It did not fit their starting assumptions about what they're looking at. So watch what they do to make it fit their worldview.
But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
You think, right? They grinded it down to look like they wanted it to look like. Again, it shows the power of their worldview. Again, brilliant people, especially in their particular fields, but wrong assumptions, wrong conclusions. And guys, even more and more today, even more secular scientists are agreeing about these facts we know about Lucy. For example, from this secular scientist, he says, regardless of the status of Lucy's knee, whatever you think about Lucy's knee, the new evidence we see today confirms that she walked like a knuckle walker. That's her basic body structure. She was an ape. She walked like an ape. And her skull was very ape-like. Here's a skull of Australopithecine. Very ape-like. Here's another one. Very ape-like. And the experts agree, even from a secular perspective, very ape-like. Like this secular scientist says, the skull forms of all Australopithecines is extremely ape-like, and they have too many specialized ape-like characteristics to be either the direct ancestor of man or in the line that led to man. She's just a distinct variation of ape, most likely. But notice what happens all too often is this. You go from these fragments, and then you get an artist's reconstruction like this, that show her looking very apish in some ways, but humans in others. For example, look at the eyes. Notice the distinct whites around the eyes. That's a very human feature. The humans typically alone have a very distinct white around the eye. Apes' eyes are mostly black. It's hard to see any of the white except in the corners of their eyes. That's very human in presentation. Why did the artist do this? Here's what the artist said. I want to get a human soul into this ape-like face. That's not biased at all, is it? To indicate something about where she was headed. And where was she headed? Well, maybe to Walmart, or today, nowhere. We're under quarantine, right? But that's the idea. And so very quickly, in summary of the Australopithecines, had skulls like chimps, brain size of a chimp, ears like chimps, long arms like chimps, legs like a chimp, hips like a chimp, shoulders and back muscles and bones like a chimp, hands like a chimp, feet like a chimp. She was some sort of variation of ape or chimp, not a hominid. And even now, more and more secular scientists are saying, why is she still in this human evolutionary line? She should be gone and presented as some sort of ape or chimp, not a human. That's the secularist. And so what we know about the Australopithecines is that they are simply some sort of extinct variation of ape or chimp. That's the actual tangible evidence. And then what about Homo erectus? Moving on from the apes now to the humans. By the way, Lucy is a great example of really upgrading a human fossil, or upgrading rather an ape fossil to be more hominid. What about the Homo erectus? Well, this is downscaling human fossils. Homo erectus was simply a human being who lived probably post-flood. Human like humans today. Human skeletons, human skulls, very human in the anatomy and in the DNA as far as we can tell. Human skull size within the variation of modern humans today, on the low end, but still within the range of variation we see today in size and scale. Nothing distinctly ape-like about Homo erectus, actually all distinctly human for Homo erectus, 100% human. And what about the other Homo sapiens? We're running out of time, so we'll quickly do the Neanderthals and begin to wrap up, because Neanderthals are very popular. They've been presented as evidence for evolution for a very long time. They were discovered back in the mid-1800s. They were originally constructed to look very ape-like. Their brain size was actually larger than ours on average, which is pretty interesting. But originally they were drawn and constructed to look like this and this and this, based on some bones that seem to be affected by some sort of bone diseases and corrupted and bent and turned and so forth. We found more bones in Neanderthals, found out they're simply humans. They had skulls like ours, with a thicker eyebrow ridge, that's true, but still within the variation of humans today. And their skulls were very stout, most likely very strong and hardy people, but 100% human. There's tons of variation in human skulls today. That's not weird. We see in their skeleton, it's strong, it's robust, but 100% human within the variation we see today. And now, for the most part, Neanderthals are presented like this in zoos and museums around the world. Thank goodness science is catching up to the truth of God's word. And so they're humans. Actually, Eric Trinkus, one of the leading experts of Neanderthals today, has this as what he presents what Neanderthals looked like, again, just like a human being, because they were human beings living after the flood. Here are some of the pictures of modern understandings of Neanderthals today. Here's me at the Natural History Museum over in London, taking a picture with a Neanderthal. I'm laughing awkwardly because he needed a lot more clothes, but that's a different story. But Neanderthal is a great example of downscaling a human fossil. 100% human, but they're downscaling them to look more ape-like to fit their worldview. We know now from so many finds, we could go on for hours on this, Neanderthals made sophisticated tools and spears. We know they actually used makeup. They made and used makeup. Very human activity. They made thread. Talked about that on Answers News this past Monday. They made thread, very fine thread, to make either baskets or clothing or different things. They made needles. They wore jewelry. They hunted dolphins and seals. New evidence has shown they actually went into the ocean to hunt for some of these things. They made and sailed ships and boats around the area. They used fire to make food, to make glue. They built huts with animal skins. Animals don't do that. They did that because they are human. They made musical instruments like flutes from the femur bones of bears. They cared for their sick. They did surgery. The guys, they were human. They ceremonially buried their dead, and they possessed complex speech like modern humans. Why? Because they were humans. That's why. And then looking at the DNA, we realize in their DNA, there's no significant difference from Neanderthal DNA to our DNA today. And the variations we see in their DNA is less than some of the variations we see today in modern DNA of humans. They are human. No doubt about that at all from the DNA evidence. And secular scientists are catching up to this, slowly but surely. So kind of putting all this together thus far, again, you've seen from all this stuff, and we could cover so many others if time permitted, but either it's an upscaling of ape-like fragments to look more human-like, like with Lucy or different examples of that, or it's a downscaling of human fossils like Homo erectus or Neanderthals, or a wrong combination of human bones and ape bones like Piltdown Man and others to make an ape man. All based on partial fragmentary evidence, based on a secular interpretation to get the conclusions they want to fit their worldview.